Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Sapna Dadwal. I'm working as a professor in the Department of Management at St. Andrews Institute of Technology and Management. This is lecture 9 of Consumer Protection. This subject is taught in BBA 6th semester of MDU curriculum of BBA course. The topics I'm going to cover in this lecture are MRTP Act 1969. I will be giving you introduction, first introduction of this act. Then I will explain you objectives of the act. Then monopolistic trade practices, meaning and features we are going to discuss, and regulation of monopolistic trade practices we are going to discuss. And I'm going to introduction about the restrictive trade practices as per this act. So what are meaning of restrictive trade practices as per the act of MRTP Act. Now I'm starting with first introduction of Monopolistic and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, that is 1969. So the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practice Act 1969 is an important piece of economic legislation formulated to ensure that the economic system does not result in concentration of economic power to common detriment. So, authority for framing this act derived from the Constitution of India. The directive principle of the state policy in Article 39 of the Constitution of India clearly mention that the state is under obligation to secure that the ownership and control of the material resources of the community are so distributed as best to serve the common good. So the act came into force from 1st June 1970, and the act applies to whole of India. So this is very clear from this that this act is based on the Constitution, where it is written, in the Constitution it is written that the ownership and control of material resources of the community should be distributed in such a manner so that it serves the common good, or it serves the community. It should be in a favor of public interest. Public at large should benefit from its distribution or from its control. Now the objectives of MRTP Act. The Act has two objectives before the amendment in 1991. The first was Regulation of Monopolies Act and Prevention of Concentration of Economic Power. Second was Prohibit Monopolistic, Restrictive and Unfair trade practices. These two were the objectives of the MRTP Act 1969. But the amendment was made in this Act in 1991. And after the amendment, the first objective has become irrelevant. And how it became irrelevant? Because the relevant provision to achieve the objective has been deleted. Now, after the amendment now the amendment which is made in MRTP Act in the year 1991, the objectives are controlling monopolistic trade practices, regulating restrictive and unfair trade practices, prevention of concentration of economic power to the common detriment. Now there are three objectives of this act: Monopolies, Restrictive Trade Practices Act. MRTP legislation seeks to regulate monopolies, and in addition to regulating trade practices which are harmful to the public interest, the Act originally sought to prevent concentration of economic power and control of monopolies. So this is the main, to prevent concentration of economic power in the hands of few people, and to control the monopolies which are against the interest of the public. Now, regulation of trade practices. The objective of MRTP Act are achieved through MRTP Commission, quasi-judicial bodies set up by central government. So the commission is empowered to inquire into any monopolistic, restrictive and unfair trade practices. In a matter relating to monopolistic trade practices, the central government can pass an appropriate order on the recommendation of the commission. The commission has to prove that practices which are against the public interest. So in a matter relating to restrictive and unfair trade practices, the commission is empowered to pass seize order if it is of the opinion that the practices are against the public interest. So in matters relating to restrictive and unfair trade practices, the commission is empowered. We have seen that the commission is empowered to seize order, a seize order. Thus, a concept of public interest which includes consumer interest are the basis for regulatory framework. So, public interest and consumer protection serve as the goal for evaluating the consequences of monopolies and trade practices. So, this is main, the public interest and to control monopolies and their consequences on the public. Now, I would like to discuss monopolistic trade practices. So, what are monopolistic trade practices? The prohibition of monopolistic trade practices is an important objective of MRTP Act. We have already discussed this, that it is one of the objectives to prohibit monopolistic trade practices in the country which are against the public interest of the citizens of the country, or against the people of the country. Then, in order to maximize profits and to increase market share, some business firms charge unnecessary high prices and prevent competition in the production and distribution of goods. They adopt unfair trade practices. These business practices create monopoly and often harm the public interest through consumer exploitation. So, monopoly occurs when a business firm raises price or eliminate competitors. In order to bring balanced economic growth and consumer welfare, it is essential to prevent these practices in the country. So, the statutory provision relating to monopolistic trade practices and their regulating are contained in the MRTP Act. Now, as meaning of monopolistic trade practices as per the Act. A monopolistic trade practices is essentially a trade practices which is concerned with charging unreasonable high prices, preventing or reducing competition, lowering product quality by adopting unfair, deceptive practices. So, as per section 2(1) of the MRTP Act, any trade practice which has or is likely to have the effect of maintaining the price of goods or the charges for services at an unreasonable level by limiting, reducing or otherwise controlling the production, supply or distribution of goods of any description or the supply of any service or in any other manner. Then second is unreasonable, preventing or lessening competition in the production, supply, or distribution of any goods or in the supply of any services. Third, limiting technical development or capital investment to the common detriment or allowing the quality of any goods produced, supplied, or distributed, or any services rendered in India to deteriorate. Then increasing unreasonable. Fourth is increasing unreasonable prices at which the goods are or may be sold or resold, or the charges at which the services are or may be proved or may be provided. The profits which are may be derived from the production, supply, or distribution of any goods or services. Fifth is increasing unreasonable the cost of production of any good, the charges for provisions or maintenance of any services. Sixth is preventing or lessening competition in the production, supply, or distribution of any goods or in the provision or maintenance of any services by the adoption of unfair methods, unfair deceptive practices. So, these are monopolistic trade practices as per the Act. As per the Act, MRTP Act, all these six are called as monopolistic trade practices. So, I would like to repeat again, maintaining the prices of goods or charges for any services at a reasonable high level, or limiting technical development, unreasonably preventing or lessening competition, allowing quality or goods produced, supplied to get it deteriorate, or increasing unreasonable the cost of production, or increasing maintenance of services, increasing unreasonably the selling price of the goods or services, increasing unreasonably profits, preventing or lessening competition in the production, supply, and distribution of goods, all are monopolistic trade practices. Now, the next topic is regulation of monopolistic trade practices. The Act provides a mechanism of inquiry and suitable action to remove the undesired effect of monopolistic trade practices. As per section 31 of the MRTP Act, if the owners of one or more undertaking are indulging in any monopolistic trade practices, the central government may refer the matter to the MRTP Commission for inquiry and report thereon. Such an inquiry may be conducted by the MRTP Commission on its own initiative or on the information available on the basis of the report. The central government may pass appropriate order. Now, the next I would like to discuss the meaning of, or I would like to give you restrictive trade practices. This is the second objective of the MRTP Act after the amendment. The first was monopolistic trade practices, prevention of monopolistic. Second is restrictive trade practices. Now, this is the second objective after the amendment of 1991. In order to maximize profit or gain more market share, traders often indulge into some trade practices which restrict, reduce, or prevent competition in the market. So, such practices harm the consumer interest and are called as restrictive trade practices. So, generally these trade practices disrupt the flow of capital or resources in to the line of production or brings about manipulation of prices or conditions or delivery, or it flows the supply in the market also. And it also it prevent or deteriorate or restrict competition in the market. So, these are called as restrictive trade practices. Generally, like monopolistic trade practices, restrictive trade practices are also against the public interest, and it harms the public, and these practices also exploit the public and against the public interest. These are the topics I have discussed in this lecture. This is all for today, and these are the topics which are related to the above topics. If any query is there, please do contact me. With this lecture, I have started Unit 4 of the topic, and with the MRTP Act, I have started the Unit 3 of the subject. MRTP Act is the first topic of the Unit 3. If any query is related to these topics, please do contact me. Any writing mistake is there, please ignore that writing mistake. Thank you so much.